The big issue, of course, today, the Coalition's new position, or the Liberal Party's new position anyway, on NetZero, the latest position. We all know the federal Liberals have finally settled it. Net zero emission targets gone. Yesterday, Susan Lee announced they would follow in the footsteps of the Nationals, who took the lead on this. They will drop the 2050 net zero target. However, Susan Lee did add that the net zero goal would be a welcome outcome if it was delivered through technology and choice rather than legislation and diktat. Now, it did come after months of internal division. In fact, let me rephrase that. Years of internal division between the moderates and the conservative factions. The Liberal Party's factional based. It culminated in a marathon party room meeting on Wednesday. We had the Shadow Ministry meeting yesterday. As I said before, in many ways, this internal struggle over net zero policy seems to be symptomatic of the larger identity struggle that the Liberal Party has been grappling with since the election defeat in May, if not before. And the stakes are high. Because it's one thing to settle a policy, the next thing is to try to sell it to a public which are at least 50% sceptical of the position. Well, someone who understands how politics works and has obviously had much to say about this issue over the years, because it's hardly a new topic, is the Liberal MP, former Liberal MP for Mackellar, former Liberal Party President, Jason Falinski. We've had many chats over the years. Great to say Jason's back on the line. Jason, good to speak again. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me back, Michael.
So, let's just put the cards on the table. I mean, you're from the moderate wing of the Liberal Party, right? So Susan Lee, factional fellow traveller, and yet she's come out with essentially a policy that, say, a Matt Canavan would be reasonably comfortable with. What's this going to do inside the Liberal Party?
Well, it really depends from this point forward. I think the issue that we've now got is a situation in which people are going to have to determine what the policy looks like. So we can't go into the next election without an energy and climate policy. No. And so we've done the easy bit. The hard bit now starts, which is, what are you replacing it with?
Okay, as you know, because you've watched many of the great politicians over the years from both sides, they win the debates and the campaigns not just through rhetoric, but through the heart. If their heart's in it and they're out there and they're willing to put their position on the line to sell something they believe in, there's an authenticity that I think a lot of voters can detect and back. My suspicion, Jason, is Susan Lee's heart isn't in this. She doesn't agree with the policy position, but she had no choice to save her own leadership. What say you?
Michael, I think that one of the things that we have here is an opportunity for Susan to lead. Look, the fact of the matter remains that the net zero policy that Chris Bowen has brought into place and that Anthony Albanese has been administering is the greatest wealth redistribution mechanism in Australia's history. So never before in our history has so much money flowed from low and middle income Australians to high net worth individuals. So just the other day, Twiggy Forrest received $58 million for a solar plant that he put on one of his mine sites. Mike Cannon-Brookes is in receipt of tens of millions of dollars for the Sun Cable project in the Northern Territory, which is yet to lay down a solar panel. Simon Holmes à Court says that he doesn't have investment in these things, but the fact of the matter is he was engaged at least and did have money in companies like 5B, which received a lot of money from the federal government. So I think Australians need to separate between the question of, are we trying to reduce emissions and reduce electricity and energy prices versus are we trying to actually send taxpayer dollars to very wealthy donors for Climate 200 and also for the Labor Party? And that's what Susan has to sell over the next 2 years.
Okay, I agree with that. But these are almost fresh words coming out of the mouths of moderates because, I mean, as you know, you're quite right what you say, the greatest wealth redistribution in our history and all this sort of stuff is quite right. But the model that the government are pursuing is almost identical to the model that, say, Malcolm Turnbull would have pursued, or indeed the moderate wing of the Liberal Party would have been in favour of. You know, subsidised wind turbines, subsidised solar farms, subsidised solar on roofs, subsidised batteries, subsidised EVs. None of that would be foreign or argued against in the Liberal Party moderate wing. So, again, I say, is the heart really in it?
Well, Michael, as you know, I hate disagreeing with you because you're almost always right. So I'm about to put myself in a very dangerous position, but that's not. But that's not true.
You and
it's
me
not
both.
true. The difference. Yeah, that's right. The difference between what the moderates argued for is a market-based solution to a challenge. Now, I don't think that your listeners, or indeed you, young people are taught, and by young people I mean people under the age of 40, have been through an education system that is telling them that if we continue on the pathway we are, the planet will be unlivable by the year 2100. Yeah. In fact, some believe by 2030. Now, if you're a voter under the age of 40, I imagine you want governments and your political leaders to be trying to make sure that the planet is still livable by, 2030 or 2100. Therefore, we need to have a policy that speaks to those voters and to that part of our community. The moderate response to this has always been that what we need is a market-based solution. And a market-based solution means there are no subsidies. There's basically the market determines what the best way to reduce emissions are for the lowest cost, most reliably. And that was, frankly, what the NEG, which was Malcolm Turnbull's answer, did. And when you look overseas and you look at California versus Texas, so Texas uses what we were proposing, which is basically a market-based solution. California is what the government is doing at the moment. Texas is the heart of oil and gas industry in the United States. It produces 5 times as much alternative energy as California does, and it started way behind. What we are proposing is we are not in favour of coal, nuclear, gas, or indeed solar panels. What we're in favour of is letting the market decide what the best way is to reduce these emissions for the cheapest price for all Australians. Now, that is something that should be decided not by Canberra bureaucrats or indeed politicians sitting in Parliament. That's something that should be decided by people who are putting their money on the line to deliver that. The problem that we have now is Matt Canavan's not saying don't subsidise electricity or energy providers. He's saying stop subsidising solar panels and start subsidising coal miners. I have a problem with that because that's picking winners and it leads to rent seeking by producers. And I just don't think that's the job of government, because whenever government's done that, it's always ended up in what we've now got with NetZero under Chris Bowen, which is a massive redistribution of wealth from low and middle income Australians to very high net worth individuals.
That was a very good answer. No subsidies, though. So let's say, all right, Liberals win, there's no subsidies. Now, I mean, subsidies, I suppose it depends how you want to skin the cat. I mean, subsidies can come obviously in the form of financial assistance from the state to pet projects. But there's almost a subtle version of a subsidy, is there not, when you say to the market, this form of technology, aka nuclear, is banned. This one over here, we're not going to pursue for love nor money, coal. This one over here, gas, we're very reluctant to allow any new drilling to take place because that will lift our CO2 footprint. You know what I mean? This is not a free market as much as we'd like it to be a free market. Energy never has been. Energy's always been one of the more government-centric markets in this country. So, okay, subsidies, I take your point about financial checks handing over, but there are levers everywhere in this that are activated to push a certain technology to the fore.
Yeah, there are three